Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and Gamefound over the next week. If you're new here, we do this every single week going over all the upcoming campaigns, but I do like to start by going over some news and announcements that I just found out about. And I do kind of have one for you this week, and that's that there is a new version of Vindication that was just announced. And if you're not familiar with this game, this is a game that's come out years ago from Orange Nebula, and it's also a game that often finds itself on top of many reviewers' top 100 games of all time. And this new edition is going to be getting a different name, and it's going to be called Vestige, and this is a game that was announced about a month ago because I did add it to my list back on October 7th, but I must have not realized what exactly it was at that time because I had no idea there was a new edition of Vindication coming out here. And if you're also not aware of this, but you're a fan of this game, or this seems like something you might be looking forward to, well, I'm not going to be getting into it in too much more detail right now because this campaign is actually going to be launching this week, so I am a little late to the show with giving you the sneak peek on this, but I will be giving you a little bit more detail once we get to it in just a few minutes, so feel free to stay tuned for that. Other than that, I do always want to give a quick mention to Alex over at Boardgame Co. because him and I do work together keeping track of all these upcoming campaigns. I post these videos every single week, but Alex posts a video at the start of the month going over the entire month and letting you know of the heavy hitters that you can look forward to. Of course, he has a ton of other great content here as well, and if you do want to learn more about Vestige and how it compares to Vindication, you definitely want to check out his channel because Vindication is one of his favorite games of all time, so I have no doubts that he'll be putting out some footage on that, giving you a thorough comparison of the two games and what he thinks of this newer version. But if you're looking for even more crowdfunded games that Alex and I may not cover, you're definitely going to want to check out Zilla Blitz because there is a whole crowdfunding scene around the historical war games, and this is an area that Alex and I don't dig into in as much detail, but Zilla Blitz pretty much exclusively focuses on those games and those platforms, and he also puts out a video every single month letting you know of some of those games to come. I'll have a link to his channel as well as Alex's in the description below. Definitely check them out and subscribe if you do like their content. But that's everything I got for an intro, and we still do have quite a few games launching this week, so let's check them out. And the first campaign we have launches on November 18th, and this one is for a new expansion for the game Park Life. And if you're not familiar with this game, this is a trick-taking tableau builder, and it does also come in two different versions. There is the People Edition, which features the full rule set, and then there is the Hedgehog Edition, which is a slightly simplified and streamlined version of that same game. And I do know exactly what you're wondering now, and the answer is yes, you can get a plushie with a zipper on it that you can use to store both of these original games as well as this new expansion. But before I get into what exactly the expansion adds to the game, I'll give you a little bit of an idea of how the original game plays, specifically the People edition of the game, because the publisher was kind enough to send me a copy. So let's go ahead and crack that open. And like I said, this is a trick-taking game, so all you really need to play it is this deck of cards here, but there are a few goodies in the box as well. You're going to be starting the game by dealing a hand of cards to each player depending on player count, and then players are going to be using those cards to play into various tricks until all the players have played all of their cards, and then that's going to be triggering the end of a round. There's 3 rounds in a game, and then at the end of the 3rd round, players are going to be tallying up all their victory points, and the player with the most at that time wins the game. I just quickly set this up as a 3-player game where each player is going to be starting with 10 cards, and then there's going to be a bunch of cards left over, and those are just omitted for this round. The game also provides player aids for each of the players as well as a first player card in order to keep track of who is currently leading the trick. And if we take a look at my hand of cards here, you'll see that we have a bunch of cards of different suits, which is both represented by the color of the card as well as the iconography on it. Each of the cards will also either have a value on it, which represents the amount of victory points it's worth at the end of the game if you can get it into your tableau, or it'll have some sort of multiplier, which is actually going to change the value of this card depending on how many cards you have in your tableau already that match that suit. Or in the case of this arrow card, it's actually going to be multiplying by the number of matching suits in your neighbor's tableaus. The nice thing about these multiplier cards is that they can be worth very little at the beginning of the game, since right now I have no cards in my tableau and my neighbors have no cards in their tableau, making the value of these cards essentially 0. But then as players add cards of matching suits into their tableaus throughout the game, it can actually make these cards worth quite a bit. This is a really nice thing to take advantage of because it's actually the lowest card in a trick that's going to be winning that trick. So even though you really want to get the 7 into your tableau, winning the trick with it is actually very difficult since it's actually the highest card offered in the game. But the way that tricks work in this game is that as the lead player, I can just go ahead and play any card from my hand to start off the trick. And in this case, I'm playing a yellow multiplier card, which is actually worth 0 at this point in the game since I don't have any of these yellow suits in my tableau currently. Each other player at the table is then going to be playing a card from their hand in turn order into the same trick. And one thing to note about how the tricks work in this game is that you can only win the trick if you match the led player's suit or color, but you are not required to follow that same suit. You can just play any card from your hand, so if you just want to get rid of a card and save that suit for later, that is something that you are allowed to do. So I'll just go ahead and randomly play whatever cards are at the top of these other players' decks. This is actually a great example that shows a few different mechanisms in the game because this player did not follow the suit, which means that they can't win the trick, so we can just discard their card for now. And then this player actually played a 0 that is every suit, which means that they did follow suit since this is a wild, but in this case they are matching my value since this is also currently a 0. Whenever there is a tie, it's the player that went last that's going to be winning the trick. This means that they have won this trick, so they're going to be adding this card into their tableau, and then the other player's cards get discarded. Because they won the trick, they are now going to become the first player, and then they're going to go ahead and play their next card. I don't want them to win with a 5 and get 5 victory points for the end of the game, so I'm going to go ahead and play under that. And then the next player is going to be playing their card, and they also happen to play a 0, which also is any suit, so they're going to be winning this trick and adding that into their tableau. These other two get discarded, and then they become the first player. So they're going to go ahead and play their card, which is a pink 3. This player plays their card, which has the 2 arrows on it, which means that it's equal to the number of pink cards in their neighbor's tableau. I don't have any cards in my tableau yet, but they do have this wild, so this one is currently worth a 1. Lucky for me, I have this 1x, which is worth the number of pink cards in my tableau, which is currently 0. So this is currently worth a 0, which means that I would win the trick. These 2 cards then get discarded, and then I would keep mine, adding it to my tableau. The cool thing about adding this card into my tableau is that even though it was just worth 0 a second ago because I had no pink cards in my tableau, this card also just happens to be a pink card, so when it does get added, it does count itself, and the value of this is now going to be worth 1 point at the end of the game. If I'm able to get even more pink cards in my tableau by that time, those are also going to be increasing the value of this card. But there is one other thing that happens whenever you win a trick that I haven't explained yet, and that comes down to these icons on the sides of your cards, and these represent how many cards that you have to discard whenever you win a trick. This means that because I won this trick with this card, I now have to discard 1 card from my hand here. I think I'll just go ahead and throw away this gray card, but if we rewind back to the other player's turns, this player would have had to discard 1 for playing that card, and this player would have had to discard 1 for winning that card. And something really cool about this mechanism that you might have already noticed is that if you are winning a lot of tricks in a round and those cards that you're winning are causing you to discard a lot of your cards, you could actually be out of the round a lot earlier than your opponents. Running out of cards does not end the round, it only ends the round for you. So if I were to have played all of my cards, I now just have to sit back until these players have run out of their cards. The funny thing about that is that if this player ran out of their cards before this player did, they still get to go ahead and play their cards into tricks as if there were other players. The only difference here is that they are always guaranteed to win whatever they play. This means that if you have a really high card like a 7, you might want to intentionally lose some of your tricks so that you are the last player standing, and you can go ahead and play that card uncontested, ensuring that you will get it into your tableau. This new expansion is going to be adding 5 new modules that you can just go ahead and mix into the game. So let's go ahead and check out what's in the box here. And we got a few more fun little stickers here, a nice little hedgehog component, as well as a bunch of new cards. This hedgehog token is going to be acting as an upgrade for the first player card, so instead of using this card, you can use this nice little token, but it does also come with another rule that you can choose to play in the game, and that's that whoever is the first player can choose whether to face this token to the right or to the left, and whichever way that you face it is going to determine in which order players have to play their cards. So this adds another layer of strategy with you being able to decide which player beside you is going to be the player that gets to play their cards last, with different pros and cons to being last or earlier in the turn order. There is also a card version of this token in the expansion as well if you would rather continue playing with the card. But the next module offered in this expansion is the Disaster Warning module, and this is going to be including a card for each of the different suits. The way that these work is that you're just going to be adding them to the deck with the other cards, shuffling them in, and dealing them out with the other cards as normal. The difference with these is that if you get one of these cards and you're able to win a trick with it, it actually forces all the players at the table to discard the rest of the cards in their hand if they have won a trick during the current round. This module alone actually adds quite a few new strategies into the game, since winning a trick with these cards can be quite beneficial since they are worth the highest value in the game now, but also to win a trick with these cards is quite difficult, so you're going to have to time it appropriately, and then you also don't really want to win with it if someone else at the table hasn't won a trick yet, since any of those players will still remain in the round, being able to play whatever cards they want. But also, all the players won't be so quick to play their 0 wild cards because they'll want to hang on to those to try and fend off any of these cards if they do make an appearance. Then there is also the case where someone else plays one of these cards and maybe the cards in your hand just really aren't all that valuable to you. You might actually choose to play an offsuit card in order to allow that player to win that trick, forcing everyone at the table to discard their cards because that might be more of a strategic advantage to you. The next two modules are very similar to each other, so I'll just go ahead and explain them together here. But this is the Lightning module and the Fireworks module. These cards are really nice because if you play them, it guarantees that you go first on the following round, but each of these cards is going to affect the current round a little bit differently. Whenever a player plays the Lightning card, the trick is just resolved as normal with the player who played the lowest card winning the trick, but then rather than adding that card into their tableau, they're going to be forced to discard that card just like every other card in that trick. This is a great card to play if a player is going to be winning a trick with a really nice card that you don't want them to have, but that player is compensated by drawing a card randomly from the deck that they'll then be able to add to their hand. The Fireworks card is actually a really interesting one because if you play this card, you actually lose that round and everyone else wins. That might sound like a bad thing for you, but this can actually be used to your advantage if the other players are playing cards that they're just trying to get rid of. Forcing them to win not only gets them a card into their tableau that may not add much value to them, but it also forces them to discard the number of cards outlined on that card, which will allow you to dwindle down the cards that they have in their hand. But also, if you do have a card like this in your tableau already that's going to be scaling its points based on what's in your neighbor's tableau, you might want to force them to add those cards that you need into their tableaus by using this card. And the last module added in this expansion adds Trump into the game, and the way that this works is that you're going to be putting this card into the center of the table, and then instead of using this token to mark the first player, you're instead going to be using it to point at which suit is currently Trump. This is another reason why they do provide a card version of this token. The way that this module gets incorporated into the game is that there's going to be no Trump suit set for the first trick of the game, but then every time a trick is won, whatever suit won that trick is going to be Trump for the next round. In this case, the player led with the blue snowflake, which means that the snowflake is going to be Trump for the next round. The catch here is that whichever suit is Trump can now beat the led suit, and if you are leading a trick, you are not allowed to lead with the suit that currently is Trump. This means that I could go ahead and play this card, but then the next player could actually try to win this trick with a 6 because the Trump always beats the led suit. Of course, if multiple Trump suits are played, it's going to be the lowest one that does win the trick. So since this player does have a 1, they're going to go ahead and play that because it does prevent the other player from getting that 6. Since the suit of Trump is always decided by the suit that won the previous trick, the blue snowflake would remain as Trump for the following round, since the snowflake was used to win that trick. But that's everything you need to know to play Park Life, and I think this new expansion adds a lot more strategy into the game, so if that is something that you are looking for, definitely check this one out, and I will have it linked in the description down below. And launching on November 19th, we have the Tanares Expedition Central Sea, and this is of course the next game coming from Jagori Games, and it does take place in the same universe as their previous Arena of the Contest games, but this is its own standalone game. Similar to the previous games, this one is also a cooperative dungeon crawler campaign game, but in this one, players are going to be playing as different pirates amongst a crew, and players are going to be playing through different quests made up of multiple encounters. All of the different encounters, as well as as their map are going to be offered through a spiral-bound booklet, and it's also going to provide any special rules or narrative or any win and loss conditions for those particular encounters. Players are going to be playing as asymmetrical characters with different strengths and weaknesses, as well as their own passive powers and ultimate attacks. You will always be playing with 4 heroes, even if there isn't that many players at the table, and if that is the case, you can optionally choose to play with the simplified version of a hero in order to make managing those extra characters a little bit easier. But every player does get to upgrade their character after each encounter, and the way that this works is that you're going to be drawing 3 improvement cards from your hero's deck, and then you're going to be choosing one of those to permanently add to your character. Another really cool aspect of the cards that you do choose to add to your character is that each of these cards can also be upgraded into a more powerful form as you play throughout the quests. But the way that this game works is that you're going to be choosing one of the quests, and then you're going to be going through the encounters for that quest. Whenever you set up an encounter, there's normally going to be different enemies that are going to be appearing out on the board, and whenever that's the case, each enemy is going to have its own initiative card, and each player will also have an initiative card as well. You're going to keep these cards above the board in order to keep track of the order of activation of each of the characters currently in play. But then also at the start of each round, you're going to be drawing an extra card from the deck, and this card is going to dictate the targeting behavior of the enemies and also any special effects for that round or limitations on the players. You're then going to be activating each of the characters in order of their initiative values, and if it's a player's character that's being activated, you'll be able to move up to the movement amount of your character, and then you'll be able to play one of your cards. Most of the cards do require a skill check where you're going to be rolling a die and then adding that value to your associated stat to determine whether or not the action was a success. But one thing to note about the way that these cards work is that even if you don't succeed in the action, there is usually some residual damage or a lesser effect that still will go into play. These cards can have a whole variety of effects to manipulate the board or heal or buff or nerf targeted characters, but most of these are going to be used to issue attacks. They're going to have a range, any special effects, as well as a damage amount, and when you do successfully injure a character, you're normally also allowed to push them back a single space, which can be very useful since there can be different obstacles and traps out on the board, and you can try to use those to your advantage by pushing your enemies into them. One thing to note about moving around on the board, whether it's one of your player characters or one of the enemies, is that if you are ever adjacent to an enemy character, moving out of that adjacency is going to be giving that other character a free attack. But the turns continue like this, with each character taking their actions in the initiative order, and then once all the characters have had a turn, that's going to be triggering the end of the round, and then you're going to be drawing another card to dictate the new behavior of the enemy and any special effects. And the encounters continue like this, with players completing different objectives, which can trigger the next phase of the encounter, or for different enemies or bosses to make their appearance, and the players win that quest if they're able to make it through all the encounters. I believe each quest is made up of 4 encounters, and your upgrades and different gear and items do carry over into the following quests. This team has had quite a lot of success at creating games in this genre, and I think the most successful of those games was their previously released Tanares Adventures game, but this one looks like it's going to be a lot easier to jump into and table and a lot more attainable in terms of its sheer size, because there is a lot of content for their previous games, and this one looks a lot more modest, which might make it a good starting point if you are interested in exploring what this team has to offer. As always, I will have a link to their campaign in the description down below. And also launching on the 19th, we have the game that I mentioned at the start of this video, which is of course Vestige from Orange Nebula Games. And like I mentioned, this is a reimplementation of their previous game, Vindication, which also just so happens to be their most popular game. This is a game that often finds itself on top of many reviewers' top 100s, and it is a game that I do have in my collection, although you can't see it because it's at the bottom of the shelf. And it's also a game that has a ton of expansions for it out at this point, so it's no surprise that they are making this new edition, and I'm sure they're going to be incorporating a lot of those expansions into the core rule set, which definitely gives them a lot more opportunity to streamline the rules, since they can just consider everything up to this point and incorporate it in the rules from the start. There'll definitely be a few other changes as well, but there's not a whole lot of info on the differences between these two games just yet, or anything explicitly saying how this game plays, but just at my 1,000-foot view, this game looks very similar to Vindication, and I don't expect that you'll want both of them in your collection. My guess is that this one will probably be a little less fiddly than the original if you do play the original with all the expansions. And I'm not saying that the original is a fiddly game, but once you start incorporating all these expansions and additional components and rules and different rule books, that just inherently adds to all the things that you have to juggle around, whereas this new version is going to have everything consolidated. It looks like they've also made some small changes with the player boards, but the biggest difference I'm seeing here is that they've separated the main board into 2 boards, whereas in the original Vindication, these were all in a single board. It looks like there's also going to be a slight difference with the theme. You're still going to be that troubled soul looking for redemption, but it looks like this version is going to be taking more of a sci-fi approach, and you're just going to see a little bit more of that reflected in the artwork. If you're not already familiar with the original game and you're wondering how it plays, I'm not going to be going into those details in this video here, but there is a ton of great content on YouTube that you can find from other content creators. But a main mechanism that you'll notice is that there is a lot of cube conversion in this game. Players are going to be building up different traits that you're going to be using as resources to take different actions. And you're going to be keeping track of all those different traits on this trait board here, but what's really cool about the way that this works is that there's these common attributes known as your ambition, your cunning, and your might. And you're going to be building up your cubes in those areas a little bit easier. But then there are the prime attributes, which are your intrigue, your ingenuity, and your guile. And in order to build up those attributes, you're going to have to combine the attributes that are adjacent to them. Players are going to be taking their actions by moving their player pawns on the other board, moving in between the different hexes there, and uncovering any new hexes that they move adjacent to. You're normally going to be choosing your actions from the different hexes that are adjacent to you, and there are a bunch of different actions and bonuses that these different hexes can provide. The game offers multiple paths to victory, and you can upgrade your character in a number of ways, which is also a really nice way to allow you to move a little bit easier out on the board. And I think a few of the reasons that this game is so popular is that it just does such a great job offering such a wide decision space throughout the entirety of the game, which not only creates a very different game every time that you play this, but it also creates a lot of opportunities for comboing in different ways. I'm a big fan of this game, but I do admit that I don't get it to the table very often, so I'm really interested what this version is going to be offering in terms of streamlining, and if I think that's going to help get this to the table a little bit more, this might be something that I am willing to invest in. If this is one that you think you might be interested in, I definitely recommend checking it out in the description below and following along, because it will get you a free promo pack added to your pledge. And also launching on the 19th, we have Hands in the Sea, and this one is a 2-player head-to-head naval war game, and this is a genre that I generally don't dive into as deeply, so definitely go ahead and check out Zilla Blitz, because I'm sure he will cover this one in a lot more detail. But this one is a deck-building game where players are going to be playing either as Rome or Carthage, and you're going to be drawing cards from your own deck in order to use those cards to take actions. As the game progresses, you'll be able to add more cards into your draw deck, either from your specific deck dedicated to your side, whether you're playing as Rome or Carthage, or instead you can add more cards from a neutral deck. The game offers a few paths to victory, either from having the highest score at the end of the game, or by capturing the opponent's capital. If you do want to learn more about this one, I will have it linked down below, and you can follow along to get a free gift added to your pledge. And also on the 19th, we have God's Heist, and this is the next game being offered from the same team that brought you V Sabotage, as well as Assassin's Creed Brotherhood of Venice, and all of these games do share a similar core system that they're built upon, and all of these games so far have also received a seal of excellence from the Dice Tower, which is their highest recognition, and it's not easy to get. I've also heard praises from other reviewers and people from the community, so it's safe to say that this team definitely knows what they're doing, and this is a system that they've continued to build upon and polish, so I wouldn't be surprised if God's Heist does end up being the most popular of the 3 games released on the system so far. I was expecting this campaign to launch a couple weeks ago, so I did already offer footage for this one, and I'll go ahead and roll that for you in a second here. But before I do that, I do want to mention that there's been a lot more info provided on the campaign page since I filmed that video, so they do have their rulebook on here if you do want to check that out, and there is a lot more content offered from different content creators as well, so if you do want to check out what they all have to say about it and how they think it compares with the previous iterations, you can find that all on the campaign page, which I will have linked in the description down below. This is another one that's going to get you a promo pack completely for free if you do follow it in advance. So if this one does look interesting to you, make sure to hit that follow button so you don't miss out on that free gift. And this one is a cooperative game where players are going to be working together to steal an ancient artifact from a game-controlled opposing faction. But while you're doing this, you're also going to be finding different treasures in order to upgrade your character and your deck. This is coming from the same creators that brought you games like V-Sabotage and Assassin's Creed Brotherhood of Venice, and this game does borrow a lot of elements from those games. But this is a game that plays over a series of rounds where players are going to be taking their actions together. Each character has their own set of action cards that they'll be able to use, and players will be combining these cards together, creating different combos in order to reach their goals. But the catch here is that most of these actions do require a skill test with a die roll, but any player can also discard their action cards in order to reduce the difficulty of a skill test. Each game's also going to have a bunch of different objectives that players can try to complete in order to level up their characters in different ways, and this includes upgrades for a more powerful die. In addition to the individual action cards that each player is going to have with their character, there's also a shared action deck that any player can choose to draw from at any time in order to perform additional free actions. The issue with this is that you may not always get the action that you were hoping for, and there are also enemy cards in that deck that could trigger the enemy faction to take actions in different ways, and if they catch you, you're going to have to either fight, bribe, or talk your way out of that situation. If you're not able to and you draw enough attention, that's going to be triggering alarms to go off, which is going to ramp up all the enemies and make them all aware of you, but this is also inevitably going to happen once you do find that artifact, and at that point players are going to be working together to try and escape with that artifact with all the guards and enemies on your tail. Of course, there is a bit more to the game, and I'm just giving you the broad strokes here, so if you do want to know the finer details, they do have a rulebook posted on the campaign page as well. You can find a link to that in the description below, and of course, you can click to get notified. And also launching on the 19th, we have Insania, and this one is a cooperative horror adventure game that does take some inspiration from H.P. Lovecraft, because this is a game that does feature multi-dimensional creatures that can also inflict insanity on the different players, and if you do get driven too far into insanity, you're going to be incurring all sorts of different disabilities that are going to be making the game a little bit more difficult. But this is a game that does play over several missions, and it is designed for a mature audience because there's going to be sensitive content that you're going to be exposed to and some morally questionable decisions that you'll have to make. The enemy activations and player order are all determined by their initiative values, and you're going to be creating an initiative queue and then activating each of those characters in order until each player and enemy has had a turn. And then at the end of the round, you're going to be drawing an event card, which is going to have negative effects, making the game more difficult the longer that it goes on. On a player's turn, they're going to be drawing effort cards, which they'll then be spending in order to take up to 3 actions. Your different actions are normally going to allow you to move around on the board, engage in combat, or destroy portals or barriers out on the board, or even scavenge for items that may be able to help you throughout the game. Some points of interest or missions might have their own special actions that you can take as well, but normally you can only spend 1 card per action, but some cards do have the ability to be chained together, allowing you to have more options and more powerful actions. Whenever your character is attacked, you can actually decide where you want that damage to be incurred, so you can decide whether it's going to be injuring your armor or your shield if you do have that, or you could spend an effort card or chain them together in order to dodge, block, or parry, or one of your teammates could also do that same thing in order to push you out of the way or take that damage for themselves. And of course, if you're not able to avoid that damage, then you're going to be losing some of those health points. As players explore the board and progress throughout the game, you'll be stumbling into some narrative scenes where you're going to have to make some sort of choice, which could lead to different upgrades and bonuses, but they can also have some consequences as well, and more than likely they'll reveal the moral integrity of your character or lack thereof. But ultimately, players are trying to complete the objectives of the mission in order to win that mission, and normally you'll be able to lose that mission if all the characters die or if the effort cards run out. And some of these missions will also have additional ways that you can lose the game, so you'll want to try and avoid those situations as well. But if this one does look interesting to you, you can go ahead and check it out. I will have it linked down below, and of course you can follow along to get notified once this one launches. And also on the 19th, we have Defenders of the Realm Legends Edition, and this one is a re-implemented version of the original game Defenders of the Realm, and this new version is going to feature a lot nicer artwork, upgraded components, and a more streamlined rule set. And if you're not already familiar with the original game, you're going to be defending from 4 different factions of monsters that are going to be spawning and spreading out on the board, with each of these factions having their own general that you're going to be ultimately trying to defeat in order to win the game. And each of these factions and their generals will operate very different from each other, with different behaviors and different challenges that they're going to be presenting to the players. Players win the game if they're able to defeat all 4 of these generals before one of the lost conditions are met. But one thing to note about defeating these different factions of monsters is that every time you defeat one of them, it makes the rest of them a little bit more powerful. Every round you're going to be drawing cards which dictate where more monsters are going to be spawning or moving out on the board, but another thing to note is that if too many monsters end up in the same location, that is another trigger point that's going to cause them to move throughout the map, corrupting the lands and making their way closer to your central city. But luckily, players will be playing as different asymmetrical characters that have different specialties and different special abilities, as well as being more proficient at certain actions than others. In every round, you're going to be drawing action cards up to the hand limit of your character, and then playing as many of those cards as you like in order to perform different actions to attack different enemies, heal yourself or your teammates, move around out on the board, or even build gates to teleport between different areas a little bit easier. These cards offer a number of ways that you can push back against the enemies, but normally it's going to involve rolling dice and then trying to get over a certain value depending on the enemy that you're fighting in order to make a successful hit that you'll be distributing across those different monsters. As the enemies move about the land, they can also corrupt it, and players can also discard cards matching the corrupted location in order to try and cleanse that location of its corruption. As I mentioned, players can use as many of their action cards as they want, but the catch here is that the more cards you use, the more resources you're going to be giving to the enemies during their turn. Players will be trying to defend the cities in a number of ways, but if the generals get a little too close for comfort, you can also deal damage to them in order to push them back a few steps. But also, players won't be able to deal any damage to them until you first defeat their minions, so you're going to want to take advantage of any moments where you have completely wiped the minions of a particular faction off the map. If you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below. And also on the 19th, we have Revenant, and this one's a really exciting one because it is the next game coming from Mindclash Games that always does a fantastic job developing their games. Mindclash does have a really solid track record that the community trusts, so it's no surprise that this one is also our Discord pick of the week. But if you haven't heard of this game yet, this is a standalone competitive worker placement game that does take place in the Voidfall universe. This is a very different game than the original. Like I said, this one is a worker placement game, whereas the original Voidfall was a 4X game. But this is a game that plays over 4 rounds where all the players are part of the same fleet, going up against a common enemy known as the Voidborn. Every round, you're going to be taking turns assigning your crew to the various ships within the fleet, with each of those ships offering different actions that you'll be able to take advantage of. Each player is going to have a captain as well as 2 cadets. And these are going to operate a little bit differently, and there is also opportunity to upgrade each of them as you play throughout the game. After each worker is placed, you'll also have the opportunity to activate one of the cards associated with that worker in order to take some bonus actions, or instead you could choose to move up the tactics track, which can gain you all sorts of benefits and help you in the player order, or you could bypass both of those options in order to gain some additional resources. Once all the players have placed their workers and taken their actions, you're going to be moving to the end of the round, and it's at this point where the Voidborn are going to be attacking your fleet. They're going to be dealing damage to the various ships, and they can and will destroy various ships, removing those worker locations from the game while that ship is destroyed. There's also a bunch of different factions within your fleet, and each of the ships are going to be affiliated with one of those factions, and every time that you take an action on one of these ships, you're going to be increasing your influence with that faction. This is where it becomes really important to plan ahead because you're going to be gaining victory points for how far you move up those various faction tracks, but those victory points are going to be multiplied if more of that faction ships have survived until the end of the game. This adds another layer to your action selection since you're not only deciding what sort of actions you want to perform, but also with which factions to make sure that you're moving up the tracks that you think will earn you the most victory points at the end of the game. Luckily, the different actions can provide a bunch of different ways that you can protect your fleet, either by destroying the enemy ships, repairing any damaged vessels, or maneuvering them to safer areas, or even activating the Revenant's hyperdrive in order to jump to a safer sector. And this is a really interesting aspect of the game because not only can it help get your ships away from the enemy ships at opportune moments, but there are also different planets in the different locations that you'll be visiting, and every time you use this hyperdrive you're going to be drawing new planet cards, and these planet cards also act as different worker locations that players can choose to use instead of the various ships. Players will also each have their own frigate amongst the fleet that they can also choose to take actions on, but you can also use this ship in order to generate resources, and you can upgrade it however you think is most beneficial to you, but your ships can also be attacked by the Voidborn, so you will want to be protecting them as well. But the rounds continue like this with players upgrading their workers and their ships and taking their various actions out on the different ships that haven't been destroyed yet, as players fight back against the Voidborn each and every round. And then the player who earned the most points throughout the game and also at the end of the game by aligning with the appropriate factions and protecting their ships is going to be the one to win the game. And if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below, and of course you can click to get notified. And then also on the 19th, we have Planepita, and this one is a competitive dexterity game where each player is going to have discs of their own color, and then players are going to be taking turns trying to flick those discs onto a board in order to score victory points at the end of the game. Much like Crokinole, you'll be able to flick your discs into your opponents in order to try and knock them out of the play area, but something that's unique about this game is that each of these components also has a magnet in them, and the board itself is also magnetic, and after you flick your piece you can also choose to flip it upside down, making it stick to the board with a little bit more strength, making it more difficult for your opponents to knock that piece off. The catch here is that if you choose not to flip your piece, it can be worth more victory points at the end of the game. But something that I really like about this game is that there is also this neutral piece in the middle here, and players can bump into that and move it around just like any other disc. But the issue with this piece is that whichever section it ends up in at the end of the game, it's actually going to be canceling out any pieces that are still face up at that point. This means that not only are the face up pieces easier to knock off the board, but they could also potentially be eliminated at the end of the game if they do end up in the same location as that neutral piece. The player with the most points at the end of the game wins, and I really do like what I'm seeing with this one. It looks like a lot of fun while also being really easy to teach and play while still bringing in a few unique twists of its own. So if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below, and of course you can get notified once this one launches. And also launch on the 19th, we have a solo game called Mech Bunny, and this is the next solo game of the month coming from Gabe Barrett. And this is a game where you have crash landed on a strange planet full of bloodthirsty predators looking for their next meal. There's not a whole lot of info on the gameplay on this one, but this one is going to be using card crafting, and you're going to be playing through various scenarios full of hordes of different monsters trying to destroy you and your spaceship. And each game you're going to be upgrading your cards and finding new weapons as you survive each of the encounters. You're going to be gathering resources and fending off your enemies long enough to fix your ship and get you back to your home. Each encounter is going to be more difficult than the last, but since this is a card crafting game, you're going to be combining different cards together in order to create some really fun combos that you'll be able to use to try and take out your enemies and put your ship back together. If you want to learn more about this one, you can check it out, and I will have it linked down below. And also on the 19th, we have The Waste of Parts, and this one's a cooperative strategy game that takes place in a post-apocalyptic world where players are riding a giant mech through the wastelands in order to reach a sanctuary at their destination. Unfortunately for the players, there's also all sorts of different creatures that are going to be appearing throughout the wastelands and climbing aboard your mech, trying to break it down and trying to drag the players into the wastes. Each of the players are going to be playing as asymmetrical characters with different stats and abilities that you'll also be able to upgrade with different items, and you're going to be spending action points in order to move between the different rooms within the mech, attack different enemies, extinguish fires, and repair different aspects of the mech in order to make sure that it continues on its path to your destination. Players can also use actions to draw up salvage cards, which provide equipment to enhance your crew members or to upgrade or improve the mech itself. And these cards are really nice to have because they are multi-use. You can either use them for whatever they have to offer, or if whatever they're offering isn't particularly useful to you at this moment, you can also choose to discard those cards in order to exchange them for resources, which you can then use for other actions like repairing the ship itself. But this mech that you're on is going to be generating a whole bunch of noise, and then the player's actions can also generate noise as well. And then any of the salvage cards that you choose to use or equip can also add even more noise on top of that. At the end of the round, any remaining enemies are going to be attacking according to their activations, but then players are also going to be drawing and placing new enemy cards equal to the amount of noise they generated. If the mech is still in working order at that time, it's going to be advancing towards its destination according to its current speed, and as the mech advances, there's going to be more powerful enemy cards that are going to be shuffled into the deck, making the enemies a little bit more difficult the closer you get to that sanctuary. If the players are able to reach their destination, then they win the game, and if you do want to check this one out and learn more about what it has to offer, I will have it linked in the description down below. Also on the 19th, we have a relaunch of Galaxy Postman plus a new expansion, and this is a campaign that I did cover a few months back, so I do already have footage for this one, but it looks like they've made some changes and added a few new modules as well, so if you want to check that out, I will have this linked down below, but since I already covered this one, I'll just go ahead and roll my previous footage for you now. And this one is a competitive worker placement pick up and deliver type game where players are going to be upgrading their ship, flying around space, delivering different messages, and transporting aliens to wherever they need to go. But like I said, each player is going to have their own ship, and this is going to be represented by their own personal board. Your ship's going to have a bunch of different locations where you'll be able to perform different actions, and these can be upgraded throughout the game, either by flipping them over to the other side or purchasing new tiles to go into that action spot. At the start of your turn, you're going to be rolling your dice workers, and then depending on the values that you rolled, you're going to be assigning those to the locations on your board for the actions that you want to perform. Each of those tiles will have their own unique actions or resource generation available to you, but then each of those tile locations will also be associated with some secondary actions that you can see printed around the perimeter of the board, with a lot of these spaces having multiple for you to choose from. You're also going to be using the ship to track things like your money, your ship's damage, as well as the energy reserve that you have left to fly your ship. And of course, these actions will allow you to do all sorts of different things like fly your ship around the outer reaches of space, which is represented by a separate board that's made up of a bunch of tiles. And anytime that you'll make a movement that moves you off of those tiles, you'll just be drawing a new one and adding it to that board. And I'll come back to everything that you can do on this board in just a second, but some of the other actions you could perform could be to heal your ship's damage, earn different resources, or spend those resources to gain additional tiles or even additional dice. And of course, you can also use these actions to deliver aliens, but in order to do that, you do need to move your ship to a location that has an alien on that hex. And unlike a lot of the other actions that usually require the same set of dice in order to perform that action, each alien will have its own specific requirements in order to pick that alien up. But if you're able to do so and then also deliver the alien to where they need to go, you're going to be gaining an associated alien card along with that, and this is going to give you victory points for the end of the game as well as a specific bonus. But there are a whole bunch of different icons that can be discovered out on the main board, and anytime a new tile gets added to that board, you're going to be populating that tile based on the icons that are there, and these can open up different wormholes that allow you to navigate through space a little bit easier, or different locations where you can pick up and deliver different packages, as well as asteroid fields that you can still move through, but you will incur a bit of damage. Delivering packages works very similar to the aliens, and you're also going to be gaining a card whenever you're able to do so, and this card is also going to be granting you victory points for the end of the game, as well as a special bonus or actions that you'll be able to perform in addition to your usual turn. Delivering these different packages and aliens are the main way to score victory points throughout the game, but players will also be gaining victory points for the upgrades that they're able to perform throughout the game, as well as any shared goals that they're able to complete. The player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game, and if you are interested in this one, you can check it out. I have links in the description below. Also launching on the 19th, we have a reprint campaign for a few Garphill Games titles, and this is going to be for Raiders of the North Sea, as well as Rune Saga and a few other promo reprints. But this is also going to be offering a deck of cards featuring the characters and artwork from their trilogy of games, so if you do want to check that one out, I will have it linked down below, and of course you can click to get notified. And also on the 22nd, we have Siege, and this one is a flip and write where players are going to be competing to get the most victory points at the end of the game. And the way that this game works is that every turn, 3 cards are going to be connected to the side of each player's player sheet, and these are going to be connected in such a way to indicate which side of the castle new demons are going to be spawning, as well as which group of demons are going to be attacking you, and then also which soldiers you can use to defend your castle. As the demons attack, they're going to be breaking through your walls and damaging your castle, but players do also have defense points that they're going to be able to spend in order to repair their walls, issue attacks from the towers, evacuate civilians, or to attack or block demons. I'm not exactly sure of all the ways to gain victory points, but it looks like the amount of civilians that you have left over at the end of the game are going to be adding to your total. Then the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game, and if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below. And launching on the 23rd, we have Spellwards, and this one is a real-time card-shedding party game where each player is going to be dealt 7 cards at the start of the game. And this is a game that doesn't have any turn order, but players are going to be trying to get rid of their cards as fast as they can, because whoever's able to do that first wins the game, but each of these cards is going to have both a letter on it as well as a number. You're going to be starting the game with one of these cards in the center of the table, and then to play a card from your hand, you have to say a word that starts with the letter on the table, ends with the letter you play from your hand, but then is also equal in length to the number of the card that's also on the card that you play. This is where the real-time element comes into play, as players are all trying to think of their own words quick enough so that they can take advantage of whichever card is out on the table, because if any other player beats you to it, you're going to have to discard whatever word you came up with and think of a new one with the new letter that they just put out on the table. A really simple game to teach and play, which is always a great recipe for a party game, and if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below, and of course you can click to get notified. And that's everything I got for you this week, and we will have some giveaways next week, so make sure to stay tuned for that, especially if you are interested in Revenant, because that may be making an appearance. But I hope you have an awesome week until then, and as always, thanks so much for tuning in, and until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.